It is 7 o'clock and you're watching the Politics Hub with me, Darren McCaffrey. As you can see, these are live pictures from Parliament Square here in Westminster this evening, where people are gathering to mourn those killed in yesterday's terrorist attack at Bondi Beach in Sydney, targeted at the city's Jewish population as celebrations for Hanukkah began. The Prime Minister said today that the attack was not an isolated incident and offered his reassurance that the government would do everything in his power to keep Jewish communities here in the UK safe, which clearly, as you can tell from that speaker and others, many in the Jewish community here in the UK do not think is happening. Well, I got reaction to the events in Sydney and indeed the rise in anti-Semitic violence here in the UK and around the world from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, just before we came on air. As we come on air tonight, there's a vigil in Westminster outside Parliament, given what happened in Sydney yesterday. And there's been criticism in Australia from some who say the Australian government should have seen this coming, that anti-Semitism has been a problem for years there. Many say the same here. What would you say to the Jewish community who are concerned tonight that the government, politicians, Parliament is not taking this issue seriously?
Well, I mean, I could point to the investment that this government and our predecessors, to be fair, have put into Jewish community security, particularly through the Community Security Trust, and I could outline other action we're taking on anti-Semitism, including in the NHS, which I'm responsible for. The problem is that in setting that out, I don't want to appear defensive at a time when I think that we have to confront the fact that simply investing in security and building higher walls and installing more cameras and stronger doors, those things are necessary, sadly, because of the anti-Semitism we see in this country and globally, but it doesn't actually get to the root cause of the problem, which is this pernicious hatred that sees Jews targeted as Jews. We saw that very recently in Manchester. We've seen it again with those horrific scenes from Bondi. And at its heart is a sort of political culture and a kind of weaponisation of one of the world's oldest hatreds that is designed to not only murder in the way that we've seen happen in Australia, but to strike fear and terror into the hearts of Jewish people. That's why what's happened on the other side of the world has been felt so acutely at home by our Jewish communities, not just because the Jewish community worldwide isn't actually that big. So there are people in the UK who know people or know someone who has been affected by those horrific events in Bondi. But that's not the only reason why it's really struck at the heart of British Jewry. It's also because this whole period of Hanukkah, it is about families coming together, it is about Jewish culture, faith and identity, and in attacking Jewish people coming together in this way, it is attacking the essence of what it means to be Jewish. And so, against that backdrop, I think it is the responsibility, particularly of those of us who are not Jewish, to stand with our Jewish friends and communities at this time, to speak with one voice that we, collectively, will tackle anti-Semitism, that we will call it out and challenge it whenever and wherever we see it. That's got to be a values-based campaign, as well as government policies to improve things like security and policing and criminal justice and all those things that are necessary to tackle anti-Semitism, but in themselves not sufficient to really attack the root causes. That comes with political leadership and values. And that's not just the responsibility of us as politicians, that is the responsibility of every decent person in our country.
Well, let's go now to Parliament Square and Emma Birchley, who's there for us tonight. And Emma, is maybe not a surprise that many within the Jewish community are in Parliament Square tonight, trying to get that message across that they feel that those in that building across the road are not taking the rise of anti-Semitism seriously.
Yes, the people here making it clear that this is a celebration of Hanukkah, the second day of the Jewish festival of lights. They are here because they will not be cowed by terrorists, but what is also very clear when you talk to them is that they want the government to sit up and listen. It was in October that there was that attack on the synagogue in Manchester. 2 people were killed. Promises were made by the government then to increase security around synagogues, to increase powers when it comes to protests. But it is quite clear that they feel that not enough is being done to tackle anti-Semitism, and in particular the root causes of that. And before this vigil started, we heard from Gideon Falter, who is the chief executive of the organisers of this event, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. And I must just warn you, this answer does contain some graphic content.
I heard directly from Keir Starmer at a synagogue straight after the Yom Kippur attack. He said that he would do everything in his power. He said that chance of globalise the Intifada should not be allowed. Those were his words, because he recognised and he knew that people calling to globalise the Intifada are calling for dead Jews on the ground in pools of blood, just like they were in Manchester, just like they are now in Sydney. And the horrific thing is that it's months later and still not a thing has been done to actually give those words effect. That is a travesty, it is a betrayal, and we need action. Time has run out for the politicians, and all of these thoughts and prayers that we're getting, sympathy is very nice, but it is not going to keep us safe, and it's not going to keep the people of Britain safe, because those who turned their guns on Jews in Sydney will next turn their guns on people in society in general, in Britain here as well.
Now, we've had a real sense of the anger and frustration in the last 15 minutes or so. They were expecting to hear from the Communities Secretary, Steve Reed, when they called out to see if he was here, and there was no response. There were shouts of coward. Then Ashley Dalton, the Health Minister, took to the stage, and as she was speaking, there was booing and shouting at her. So clearly anger coming from the crowds. At the moment, we have Richard Tice up on the stage, the Deputy Leader of Reform. It is a chance for people to hear what the different parties have to say, and it is quite clear that when it comes to the government, there is frustration. And what we do have here tonight is a very visible presence from the police. It's been made clear that the Metropolitan Police want to provide reassurance. They want to provide deterrence, but also to make it clear that anyone concerned should approach an officer. There is that real sense of fear amongst many of the people here, that real sense that they are not safe and they want more to be done.
OK, Emma, live for us there on Parliament Square in Westminster. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll have continued coverage of that vigil and indeed the events from Sydney throughout the night here on Sky News. But I want to move to politics here in the UK now, and indeed to the Health Secretary. A major development for the health service that doctors in England will walk out as planned this week after they voted to reject a new government offer to end the long-term running dispute over pay and jobs. Resident doctors, those previously known as junior doctors, will strike for 5 days from Wednesday in the run-up to Christmas. The Health Secretary has accused the BMA of putting patients at risk, but the union says that West Drayton could still come to the table to prevent a walkout. Here's what they had to say.
The Health Secretary's been out scaremongering at the weekend with regards to the flu outbreak. This is still nowhere near the levels that we've seen in the NHS before, and the Regional Medical Director in London at the weekend said that it's within the bounds of what the NHS can cope with. The strikes are still avoidable even at this late stage. I am more than happy and prepared to meet the Secretary of State today or tomorrow to try and get towards a credible offer to call off this industrial action. It's not a decision that is final. It just needs the Secretary of State to come forward and work with us to get to an offer that fixes the jobs crisis for doctors at the moment and also addresses real terms pay erosion.
Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's in the studio with me tonight. And John, Here we are yet again, leading into Christmas and strikes in the health service.
It was a resounding vote against the latest offer from Mr. Streeting. It was 83% against and only 17% in favour of accepting the Health Secretary's offer, 65% turnout. Now, the Health Secretary, of course, has been pretty firm on pay. He makes the point that they had a 29% pay rise over 3 years last year. They're demanding 26%, which he's described as a fantasy. Now, in the House of Commons, there was an urgent question from the Conservatives about the preparedness for flu outbreaks and so on in the NHS in the winter. Mr. Streeting called on resident doctors to ignore the BMA. He said, "I'm appealing to ordinary resident doctors to ignore the BMA strike, go to work this week." He's, as we've heard over the last few weeks, some tough words about the BMA. He's accusing them tonight of abandoning patients in their hour of greatest need. He said that goes against everything a career in medicine is meant to be about. And he talked about a double whammy of flu and strikes.
And, John, this is difficult, isn't it, in some ways, because it's a Labour government, and this is a Labour government that came to power saying they were going to stop these strikes from happening.
Well, they rushed into a deal and clearly stopped the strikes for temporarily, but now, of course, they're back. And those numbers of 83% against just shows how strong the support is for the BMA leadership. You know, when he says that ordinary doctors should ignore the BMA, well, 83% is a big number. Now, in the Commons this afternoon, Stuart Andrew, who is the Conservative Shadow Health Secretary, said they would ban strike action by doctors. Mr. Streeting said that was political nonsense. So that's not going to happen. But it is deadlock. Mr. Streeting must have hoped that perhaps he might be able to head off this strike. In your interview with him, he's talking about postponing the strikes till January. That's not going to happen. There are those. I remember in this studio some time ago. Mick Lynch, the former General Secretary of the RMT, said, well, what the government should have done is gone for a 3-year deal, tied them in. Mr. Streeting argues, no, that wouldn't work because you'd have 3 years would be up in the run-up to the next general election.
Well, it's certainly, as you say, a pretty big headache for the government and indeed for Wes Streeting in particular, John. And I've been speaking to the Health Secretary and here's what he had to say to me. Let's talk about why you're here, though, and that is about this doctor's strike. Now, I've got a quote here from a man called Wes Streeting. He was the Shadow Secretary of State for Health back in 2022, on the 12th of December, almost to the day, in which he said, the power to stop these strikes
lies squarely with the
government and the Secretary of State. And that statement that you made 3 years ago is equally as relevant today. You could stop these strikes tonight if you wanted to, couldn't you?
I wish that were the case. In fact, when I made those comments, as you say, a few years ago, that was in the context of the Royal College of Nursing and Unison, a biggest public sector union, offering to call off their scheduled strike action if the government were only prepared to sit down and talk. That was the only condition, that was the only thing they asked for. I would love to be in a position today where the BMA were saying, we'll call off strikes this week if you sit down and talk to us. But I phoned the BMA's Resident Doctors Committee chair only this afternoon to say, I've obviously seen the results of their latest ballot, and I asked again if the BMA would be prepared to reschedule their strike action to January. That's outside of their strike mandate. I offered to extend their mandate so that they could do that, because they know as well as I do that this week is the worst possible time for the NHS. It risks not just harm to the NHS, but harm to patients. And I cannot understand why they would not accept that reasonable offer. Okay. And, of course, we can use that time to talk. But even if they reject the deal I put forward, I would have thought they would at least do the right thing by other NHS staff and by patients who are going to feel the brunt of what they're doing.
The reason they've rejected your deal is because they want to be paid more. Now, they claim... Can you tell me if this is right or not? They say that doctors' pay is around a quarter less in real terms 16 years ago than it is today.
There's
that
definitely
true?
been pay erosion. We can argue with the BMA about what measures of inflation they're using, but whatever figure you use, it is true to say that under our predecessors, the value of doctors' pay was eroded. I've never disputed that. What I did when I came into office within a few weeks was to start addressing that. So they've had a 28.9% pay rise from this government. We've not got to next year's pay yet. They're already back out on strike. There isn't a precedent for this in British trade union history.
Because they made it clear at the time. They literally said about that inflation-busting pay rise that the deal was not the end of the journey. That, yes, it was a step towards it.
I never said it was either.
So none of this should come as a surprise. We know they've been looking for more money. You've accepted they've got at least a grievance in that their pay has been eroded. There is only one way to settle this strike, is to pay them more. And I come back to your original quote, you could do that if you wanted to.
The 28.9% increase they've already had has been the highest in the public sector and 2 years in a row. They want another 26% on top of that. Now, Darren, if we applied that across the entire public sector, where other people's pay has been eroded, then that is a whopping great bill that this government cannot afford. If we then apply that across the entire private sector, there will be plenty of people watching in the private sector who've also suffered pay erosion and whose taxes are paying for public services.
How do you
so there's a gap between what is demanded and what is affordable.
And the question is, they want to be paid more. That's the only...
doesn't everyone? I'm sure there are lots of people watching whose taxes are paid for the pay rise already who would like their pay to go.
How do you bring this to an end? The only way I can see... By the way, this has got the overwhelming backing of doctors. This is I think it's 80% have essentially said they want to go on strike. The only way, unless you've got some other magic wand I'm unaware of, to bring this strike to an end is by paying them more, isn't it?
Well, I'm afraid, Darren, that we've gone as far as we can, as fast as we can. That's not to say there won't be pay increases for resident doctors and for other public sector workers in future years. We haven't even got to those pay rounds yet. This is not conditioned for strike action. I also offered to move on jobs with emergency legislation that would have reduced the competition for places from 4 to 1 to less than 2 to 1. So I think wherever they've made fair arguments, whether on pay, terms and conditions, their working conditions, I've tried to move as far and as fast as I can and as far as the government can afford. I think we are now in a position where their demands are completely unrealistic and where their actions, I'm afraid, are unconscionable, because even if they reject this offer, which they are entitled to do, even if they reject this offer, they could have said, but you know what, we're not going to put consultants and other NHS staff through it this week. We're not going to risk patient safety. We will hold our strikes in January. They haven't done that. They are choosing to inflict damage on the NHS at the worst possible time, and they know they are risking patient harm in the process, and I think that is unconscionable. OK, I just want to touch on two other brief things, if I can, Wes, because you're clearly frustrated with the doctors, but you seem also incredibly frustrated with your own government. In fact, you've said you're pretty frustrated, that you're selling yourselves short and that you're the maintenance department of the country. I mean, previously you've attacked the culture inside Number 10. I mean, it does seem that you are pitching... let's be honest with this. It feels that you're slagging off Keir Starmer and that you're pitching to get his job. No, on the contrary, politics is a team sport. And when I'm talking about our need to get our message across more effectively, to explain the values that sit beneath our decisions, to make sure that people understand our achievements as well as our setbacks. That's the Prime Minister's job, and you're saying he's not doing it very well. Politics is a team sport. This rests on all of our shoulders. This isn't a problem with one person. These are challenges the whole team needs to lean into, because there are lots of things this government has done which I'm enormously proud of, and not just on the NHS, where we've got waiting lists falling for the first time in 15 years, but the 500,000 children will be lifting out of poverty. The trade agreements that the Prime Minister has helped to personally negotiate that has not only secured jobs in workplaces like Jaguar Land Rover, but have safeguarded jobs and created new jobs for the future in places like the Clyde with shipbuilding, up in Barrow with the defence industry. So there are lots of things that this government has done. Could your viewers list them all off? As readily as they might list the things that they've been cheesed off about and the mistakes we've made? I don't think so. If every Labour MP who came on your programme was asked what are the top 3 things you think this government has done, I think we would all, firstly, easily be able to name 3, but would they all be the same 3? Would we get that message across effectively in a way that connects and sits with the public in the few seconds everyone pays attention to the news and politics every day, if we're lucky? Probably not. That's what we need. That's where we need to get off on the right foot in 2026.
Wes Streeting speaking to me a little earlier. Let's bring in tonight Joe, that's the Home Affairs spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats, Max Wilkinson, and the former Conservative government advisor, Mercy Muroki. Very good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's talk about these strikes, if we can, Mercy. I mean, it does feel like we're back here again. Is Wes Streeting, though, essentially in an impossible position, which is, as he's kind of pointed out there, I mean, he cannot give another massive pay rise, having done that last year.
Yeah, and I think it was quite naive, actually, of the government to come in and think they'd give doctors this huge pay rise and that they wouldn't come back for more. The reality is that the way I see it, and the reason I think a lot of the public now, the majority of the public, don't actually agree with these strikes, is because everybody's in a difficult position. They've been given this pay rise, and at the end of the day, if you're going into a career in medicine, you should be seeing it as, not something you go in for the money to get these huge boosts every year in pay. You should be doing it out of the love of being a doctor, and actually it's a long-term career for these people going in it. They make good money.
But they do work really hard, and they do have to pay for the bills and accommodation.
And so does everybody else in the country, actually, and still don't earn as much as many of these doctors do. Yes, OK, they might not earn huge amounts when they first start, but, lots of people in the country don't earn anywhere near as much as even the most junior of doctors. And at the end of the day, when they've finished being a doctor, they get significant levels of pension, much higher contributions the NHS makes. I think £1 billion a month goes towards pension payments, much higher than the private sector. So this is a long-term career that you shouldn't go into if you're going to spend all of it complaining about pay.
Max, what's your view on this? Because I think the BMA are suggesting that the pay offer as it stands on the table today equates to 49p an hour.
Well, I think to most people, when it's put in the percentage terms that are being demanded by the BMA, it does look like a lot, right? That looks like a big pay rise. And most people this year won't be getting that, regardless of whether pay's been suppressed for us over the last few years. And when I say us, I don't mean MPs like me. I mean people out there whose doors I knock on, who are feeling the pinch, right? What we're seeing at the moment, of course, in the NHS, is this crisis in flu. And there are so many people who are really, really suffering, particularly the more vulnerable people, and apparently a lot of children as well. And we're getting to a point now where the NHS is going to end up in a crisis. Wes has spoken about that, the Health Secretary, of course. And in that context, it does all look a bit irresponsible.
What would you do, though? Because at the end of the day, there was a 60-odd% turnout, 83% voted for it. They're clearly not willing to back down. What would you do? What would the Lib Dems do to bring a strike like this to an end? Surely it has to involve some more money, no?
Well, of course, the important point is to not get into this situation in the first place. And after years of pay suppression, it isn't any surprise that people are asking for more money. The problem that we've got now is the government has given the nation a situation where they inherited, the current government inherited a position from the Conservatives that was suboptimal in this area. They agreed to a rather large pay rise, and now the doctors are asking for more. Now, we all want to get paid more, of course. That's entirely normal. But at the moment, it does just look very irresponsible. And what we need to be focusing on is making sure that the support is out there for people who need flu jabs, because at the moment there are a lot of people out there who don't have a flu jab, who don't have the vaccine, so they need to be reactivating those COVID-era volunteer jabbers, for example, getting jab vans out there on the streets. Okay. That's what the NHS and the government needs to be focusing on.
Now, see, this is difficult, isn't it, for the Labour Party? Because, as I was saying to John earlier on, I mean, they came into government saying, we're going to bring this all to an end. And yet, 3 years ago, Wes Streeting was attacking the Conservative government for strikes. It's not, literally the week before Christmas, and yet here we are again.
Well, exactly, and I think this goes to show, Labour came in making very naive promises, I would say, that they were going to, create this transformational change. You wouldn't be seeing any of the problems that we were all seeing under the Conservatives, admittedly, and they, I guess, assumed that governing was going to be an easy job. And actually, I think what we've seen is a huge degree of not only
they would say, of course, and Wes Streeting recognised this, they would argue there's been 16 years of pay erosion. And the Conservative Party were in government for 14
look,
of those 16
there's only
years.
so many times you can keep sort of parroting this line that it's the old guys, we have nothing to do with it. I just think they're running out of time to carry on using that line. And actually, they're the governing party. They're the ones who decided to give this significant pay rise, naively believing they wouldn't come back for more. And at the end of the day, they're the government, and we have to hold them accountable for what's happening right now.
OK, thank you very much indeed. It is certainly not the Christmas present that I think the Health Secretary or the government want the week before Christmas. And this story is going to feature, of course, in tomorrow's papers. We've got our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us tonight, as you can see, will be the Daily Mirror columnist Kevin Maguire and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor Claire Ellicott. OK, you're watching the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Up next, the Prime Minister is in Berlin for talks on Ukraine as Kyiv hails real progress, apparently, in the negotiations happening tonight to end the war. We'll be talking about that after the break.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
To Berlin now, where Ukraine's top negotiator has hailed real progress in talks to end the war with Russia. We've now got a readout of what has been agreed by the leaders there, including the Prime Minister and the leaders of Germany and France. Let's go live to the German capital. Our international correspondent John Sparks is there for us tonight. John, very good evening to you. What's the latest?
Hi, Darren. Yeah, well, a significant shift in the mood music here. That's certainly much more positive. And I think there are significant changes to the substance as well when it comes to the Ukrainian peace deal, or a prospective Ukrainian peace deal. Take the words of Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, as evidence of this. Last week he was in London. He said he was sceptical about some of the elements in US documents relating to the Ukrainian peace deal. He was sounding completely different this evening when he made a series of remarks at the Chancellery building behind me. He said that we have witnessed over the last couple of days, because the Americans and the Ukrainians have been talking here, the greatest diplomatic momentum since the war has begun in 2022, and he praised the security guarantees that are being offered by the Americans now. They've put them on the table. He called them remarkable. We've got a few more details from senior US officials this evening as well. They say they are prepared to offer Ukraine NATO-style Article 5 mutual assistance security guarantees. They've put those guarantees on the table in case Ukraine is attacked again. They've put them on the table, but those guarantees will not last forever. So you get the feeling there, they're offering Ukraine something that they want, cast iron security guarantees, but they won't last forever. That is the hard sell. And I think that might be why when Zelensky took to the podium to make his remarks, he was sounding a little less enthused about it all. He also went on to say that Ukraine has got really difficult issues in terms of territory to solve. And that's a reference to the Donbass, which the Russians are claiming all of. That's a really difficult one to solve. And these US officials who were quoted tonight, they said that would be up to the Ukrainians and the Russians to solve by themselves. That is a really tough one to get around, I think. Still, I think that the main significance here is the change in atmosphere between the Americans and the Europeans. And in light of that, the Europeans have just released a document, this is from Friedrich Merz's office, of detailing other areas of agreement between the Americans and the Europeans, and these are significant. Both sides saying that they will work together to rebuild the Ukrainian military, which would remain at a level of 800,000 personnel. That is significant. I think even more important, the US indicating that it would back a European-led multinational force in Ukraine, a sort of coalition of the willing. The Americans, it sounds like, are on board. And I have to say that would be unacceptable. We know that that would be unacceptable to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. He's made that completely clear. And I think that's where these things get difficult. It would ultimately be up to President Trump in terms of selling a coalition of the willing. President Trump would have to sell that to Putin. You know, he may do that, or he may scrap this part of the deal. And I think that's why we have to be skeptical about some of the things that we have heard tonight. But certainly the relationship between the Americans and the Europeans, that sounds like it's on a much better footing.
OK, John, live for us there in Berlin tonight. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening. Still with us, Max Wilkinson and Mercy Muroki. Very good evening again. And Max, it feels to me that we're on this kind of carousel, we have been for a while now, where, you know, Putin says this, Trump says that, then the European leaders get together like we're seeing in Berlin tonight, it was London last week, and yet we never really get any further forward.
It does seem like that, doesn't it? And there were some positive words there in the readout. The problem is that what's very clear is that Putin's idea of a peace deal is where he gets to trample all over Ukraine's borders and keep as much territory as he wants. And the UK certainly shouldn't ever be in a position where we're backing that kind of deal. And Zelensky is being forced into positions he clearly doesn't want to take. Now, we do still have some ammunition on our side, right? And not physical ammunition, but there are Russian assets that could be seized, that have already been seized, and that could be given to Ukraine to help them bolster their defences and their offensive capabilities as well. And doing that would make a real big difference. Now, the UK can do that. The UK can do that in concert with Europe as well. And that's where we need to be pushing, as well as these peace talks. But ultimately, we shouldn't be taking anything from Vladimir Putin, or indeed, we shouldn't be taking too much solace from what's being said by the Americans, because as we know, Trump and his representatives are a pretty chaotic bunch of people.
Mercy, is it understandable why President Trump is frustrated with all of this? And you get the impression that at some stage you might just walk away from it all.
I mean, the reality is we have been relying on America, and that's why President Trump has been very cross. He hasn't thought that Europe has been pulling its...
It's one of the reasons he probably also got elected, to be fair.
Well, quite exactly. And, you know, John said there that it's been positive, and the problem in this is that if it's a positive choice talks for Ukraine, it's certainly almost not going to be positive for Vladimir Putin, and the other way around. So we're kind of in this intractable position where any gains from, that perceived gains for Ukraine are absolutely going to be a red line for Vladimir Putin. And I think, actually, it's really morally incumbent on European leaders and, our Prime Minister in particular to show incredibly strong moral fortitude on this issue, actually, and not just, yes, the Russia-Ukraine thing is, in mainland Europe, but actually Russia poses a direct and real threat to this country as well, and maybe not militarily, but we've certainly seen, attacks on UK soil, we've seen poisonings, we've seen, aggressive behaviour, they spread huge amounts of disinformation. So actually, any victory for Russia in this war, anything that sort of emboldens them, will have a material impact, I think, on our security over here.
And just on that point, I wanted to move on to this because you raised it, and we've heard this, by the way, multiple times, about the threat that Russia poses to us here in Europe, but particularly the UK. This is what the MI6 boss had to say a little bit earlier on. Just have a watch of this.
We all continue to face the menace of an aggressive, expansionist and revisionist Russia seeking to subjugate Ukraine and harass NATO. I find it harrowing that hundreds of thousands have died, with the toll mounting every day because of Putin's historical distortions and his compromised desire for respect. He is dragging out negotiations and shifting the cost of war onto his own population.
That's the boss of MI6. I don't know where you feel about this, Max. I'm kind of torn between lots of people, lots of very senior people in our military and elsewhere, saying that, this is a genuine, real threat that could see us effectively go to war by the end of this decade. And I go, is that really true? What is your sense? Do you think we are now, some would argue we are on an inevitable path to war with Russia?
Well, whether it's inevitable or not is very difficult to speculate about today. The fact is that we are already under attack from Russia in many different ways, even if they're not firing missiles at us and there's not Russian troops on our borders, right? We know what's happening in the seas around Britain. We know what's happening in the cyberspace. I'm privileged to represent the constituency that has GCHQ on the edge of it. Many of my constituents are on the front line of this already. Now, the warnings from the head of MI6 there should give us all pause for thought, and that is exactly the kind of statement that should make us consider how we can get to 2.5% of GDP or defence spending so much quicker, Darren, and then go beyond that, because that is where we need to get to ensure that we don't actually end up in a really dangerous position where we look like we're weak.
Just briefly on this, Mercy, have you got your fingers in your ears? That's what people get accused of, that we're not taking this threat seriously enough.
Well, I think we've been weak. We just are weak, I think. Certainly the UK is in a much weaker position than it used to be, and I just don't think we showed the level of moral leadership that I would hope we would see from our leaders. I think we're quite weak and wobbly on matters of national security, whether it's against Russia, whether it's speaking out against China. But I do think that if we're speaking about the British public, I think a lot of us have kind of tuned out because of the more immediate problems at home. But, as we both say, that, this isn't to be taken lightly at all.
OK, Mercy, Max, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. We're coming up on the Politics Hub after the break. Mercy just talked about it there, the situation in China. The pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai is convicted on national security charges in Hong Kong. We'll ask whether the British government is doing enough to help the UK national and indeed to stand up for British citizens. Now, a pro-democracy campaigner could face a life sentence after being convicted of national security offences in Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai is a British citizen and a media tycoon who was arrested in 2020 after China imposed draconian new laws following huge anti-government protests in the territory. Well, the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has today been condemning the prosecution, but the government is accused of not doing enough to secure the 78-year-old's release. Here's what Yvette Cooper told the Commons this evening.
Jimmy Lai is a British citizen. He has been targeted by the Chinese and Hong Kong governments for peacefully exercising his right to freedom of expression. This was a politically motivated prosecution, which I strongly condemn. Jimmy Lai now faces the prospect of a sentence which, for a man of 78 years, could mean the rest of his life in prison. I call again for Jimmy Lai's immediate release.
Well, our Asia correspondent Helen Smith has been following events from Hong Kong.
The people of Hong Kong already knew how this story would end, but still, they queued up to see it. What would be the fate of the man who's been called this city's greatest dissident? As Jimmy Lai's verdicts came down, they could only quietly watch on. The fervent pro-democracy figure guilty of national security offences. We've no expectation for the verdict, this woman says. There's no hope, there's no fairness. Jimmy Lai was one of this city's most bombastic figures. A billionaire media tycoon, a lifelong critic of Beijing.
Whatever they do is fine.
An open supporter of pro-democracy protests. But in the crackdown that followed these scenes, opposition is now deemed a crime. Lai's case, a landmark example. In court, Jimmy Lai looked thin and drawn, but he smiled and waved at his family and for a moment looked really struck by the emotion of it all. There was never really any doubt about what this verdict would be, but it is nonetheless a hugely symbolic moment for Hong Kong. It is a conclusion of sorts, not just for Jimmy Lai, but for the wide-ranging crackdown that's been seen here, the curtailing of free press and free speech. Outside court, Lai's family were not free to speak.
Is it possible to get your response to the verdict today?
Doing so here could be dangerous. That was left to his son and lawyers in London. Lai is a British citizen. They say the government needs to act now.
Well, my biggest fear is that, because obviously that I never see my father again, that he dies in the Hong Kong prison. He's a British citizen, so if he dies in prison, it changes what we stand for as a country. We must not let that happen, and the Prime Minister can do a lot. It's about putting actions behind words. It's about making my father's release a precondition to closer ties with China.
The authorities here insist Lai used his newspaper and connections to incite violence and try to overthrow China's government. Nonsense, say pro-democracy figures. Emily is one of the few still willing to speak. She says hopes for improvement now slim.
Never say never, but I'm a realist. I know that people are terrified. Most people do not want to fight for independence, but they want to be free.
Jimmy Lai was taken from court back to the prison where he's been held in solitary confinement. His trial is a marker for how Hong Kong has changed, and one that's been watched by the world. Helen Smith, Sky News in Hong Kong.
OK, let's bring back in Max and Mercy. And Mercy, you were saying just before we went to the break there that you think our leadership has been weak, and you referenced China there. I mean, there are always strong words, aren't there, from the Foreign Secretary, but it doesn't necessarily feel that there's any action to follow it. But then the argument would be, what could the UK realistically do or achieve?
Yeah, you're right. There are always strong words, and that's sort of the problem. I think, my heart goes out to Jimmy Lai and his family. And again, as Nat Beattie said, he's a British citizen, and it looks awful for the British government. And of course, this hasn't just been this government. It was the previous government as well, for there to have been such a weak response. And actually, it's not just in this case in particular, it's just in general. I feel that we have an incredibly weak response.
What would you want us to do then?
Well, yes, there's been parliamentary debates. Yes, there's been strongly worded letters here and there. I know that there was some, words in Parliament which was looking quite empty, actually, which is, again, another disappointing thing. But, Sir Ian Duncan Smith, for example, and many others in Parliament have been calling for much stronger actions, actual actions against China, sanctions, for example. I know that obviously China is a huge economic, ally, so to speak, of ours, and that's why there's such weak sort of action towards them. And I think we're almost so beholden to China that it almost doesn't matter what the actions of the Chinese government are, because our politicians don't want to stand up to China, and it's left to, backbenchers and sort of foreign affairs committees to actually, show that strong moral fortitude about it.
Are we beholden to China?
I don't think we should be beholden to China.
It's not quite what I asked, though. Are we beholden to China?
As a nation, I hope not, but China's a very powerful nation in itself, right? That doesn't mean that we don't have anything that we could possibly do. So the Foreign Secretary today has said she's going to summon the ambassador. I mean, that's the very least that we might expect. What we should be doing, Darren...
The bottom line is that we would never win any confrontation with China. That's just a realistic position that we're in these days now.
What we should be doing, Darren, is looking at some of the things that we can do to influence. So the FIRS scheme, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, we could add China to that. Part of the reason that the government is being quite unclear and looking a little weak, as Mercy has said, is because the government is speaking on both sides of this debate, right? And the previous government did roughly the same. The former Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has spoken up in Parliament and spoken about the sort of nuance that he found. The current government is finding that nuance as well. The FIRS scheme, that would make a difference. Also, being a little bit stronger on this discussion about the embassy, that's something that the government could do as well. And there are security elements related to that, even though we all know what goes on in embassies in general. But this goes back to something that we can actually be really proud of as a nation, right? The schemes that we've had for BNO, that has made a big difference to Hong Kongers coming here. And if you go back to the 1990s, when Paddy Ashdown was the leader of the Liberal Democrats, he led some of those calls to make sure that Hong Kongers could come here if they didn't feel safe when China took over the rule of Hong Kong. And that's something we can actually be really proud of. And that's where we have shown strength in the past, Darren.
And the Prime Minister is still due to go, of course, to China, I think at the end of January, it's planned. Mercy, Max, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. So what we've had in this programme tonight, we've had Russia, China, NHS strikes, and that's just tonight that the Prime Minister is having to deal with, because coming up next on the Politics Hub, we'll be looking at Keir Starmer's record in office. He was in front of senior MPs today. It's not been the best end-of-term report, I think it's fair to say. Discussing that after the break.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the terror attack thousands of miles away that has sent shockwaves through Britain's Jewish community. 15 people were killed in the attack on Bondi Beach yesterday. Among them, a rabbi born in Britain. I'll be speaking to a member of his family who lives opposite the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, as Jewish people contemplate another attack on what is supposed to be a day of celebration. That and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth, Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off. And make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Sky News has been given exclusive data showing every Palestinian who has been killed in Gaza since the war began. Our analysis of this pattern in the killings suggests that entire families were wiped out in their homes or shelters. The data and forensics team is a multi-skilled unit dedicated to providing transparent journalism from Sky News.
We located footage of the aid drop to a tent camp in central Gaza.
these airdrops are falling in extremely populated areas.
We combine traditional reporting with advanced analysis of satellite imagery, social media, and other open source information. And this is just one of the strikes and incidents we've been able to geolocate across Gaza. Sky News has found Nazi speeches and marching music have been used as background sound on tens of thousands of TikTok videos as far-right groups try and spread their message. Sky News has seen 72,000 posts used in this way. There's no evidence yet of foul play at Heathrow. It shows weaknesses that enemies could take advantage of. Elon Musk says it is, quote, a viper's nest of radical left Marxists who hate America. Supporters say it saves lives and projects American power and influence.
I think we would generally be called far right, sure.
It's called Return to the Land, and they invited me in.
A lot of people are going to be, why are you making Nazi references?
Right.
Well, why wouldn't I?
Its founder says he is building a fortress for the white race.
It's a racial association. I kind of want to ask you, after seeing this, do you think what we're doing is immoral?
We followed a social media trail that led us to Bristol, where a confrontation between protesters erupted into a full-scale riot.
Here it really is pitched battle skirmishes, hurling missiles, throwing punches.
I'm Tom Cheshire, Sky's data and forensics correspondent.
Right, Parliament is breaking for Christmas recess this week. Indeed, all of us are, aren't we, to a degree? And receiving his end-of-term report, the Prime Minister today faced questions from senior MPs on his record over the past 12 months. The Prime Minister spoke about his frustration when asked by the Liaison Committee about what he'd found difficult in delivering his so-called plan for change.
My own sense after 12 to 18 months in the job is that, and this is a fault of governments of all political colours, every time something has gone wrong in the past, successive governments have put in place another procedure or another body or another consultation to try to stop ourselves ever making a mistake again. My experience now as Prime Minister is of frustration that every time I go to pull a lever, there are a whole bunch of regulations, consultations, arm's length bodies that mean the action from pulling the lever to delivery is longer than I think it ought to be.
It's almost as if he could do something about that, being Prime Minister. Max and Mercy are with me in the studio. I mean, it's quite incredible listening to the Prime Minister and government ministers saying they're just constantly frustrated.
Yeah, I'm sure he's feeling what we all are feeling, quite frankly. I think we're all frustrated at the government's performance at the moment. And look, I think this government has been disastrous, in my opinion, and it's been disastrous for
well, they would, for balance sake, they would say they've not been in power terribly long and they did have a pretty bad record to take over.
I mean, again, there's only so long they can keep using this line that, well, we've inherited this horrible situation. We've now had 2 budgets in which the government has almost sort of single-handedly put off every business person in the whole country against them, made it incredibly, they were voted in because they said we were going to bring in change and they were going for growth. This is not the change we signed up for. This is just about the worst change everybody could hope for, including businesses. The welfare bill is ballooning beyond what anybody could want. Businesses are suffering. Ordinary people are feeling worse off. I don't think the Prime Minister and the government have performed well on any measure at all.
Fair to say, I don't think you're a fan of his. After that, Max, we're told, I mean, to be fair, I think even Keir Starmer would say it's not been the easiest of years, but we're told that his leadership and the country's going to turn the corner next year. Are you optimistic?
Well, it's difficult to see how the Labour Party is going to turn the corner on the economy after the last 2 budgets, right? And if we were to look at this as like an end-of-school term report, probably for business studies, you'd have to get a U, because I don't meet a single business person who tells me the government is doing very much to help them, right? All the SMEs are saying that it's more difficult for them to employ people, more expensive for them to employ people, and they're not doing enough to help growth. And we got to the stage now where the public sector is crowding out the private sector, and that's a really difficult position for us to be in. Where I would give him a better grade, I'd probably go for a B on geography, because he's been doing all right going around the world, talking to other nations' leaders. It would have been an A-star if he'd been good enough to move faster on relations with the European Union and get a better trade deal with the EU.
That may well happen. We don't want to start the old Brexit debate again because we haven't got much time. All I would say, though, is both of you, quite briefly, if you could say Keir Starmer needs to do something next year to change the game, what would it be?
He needs to cut welfare spending.
So, as in that would, I mean, the problem is...
He needs to save the money
I don't think the Labour Party is prepared for that.
Well, that's the problem.
Max, what would you say? One thing.
A new trade deal with Europe to lower trade barriers with the EU, which would help the cost of living, and it would mean that businesses could start to grow really, really quickly in a way they haven't since we left.
We don't want to start the Brexit debate, but it does seem that the Labour Party may have a closer relationship with the EU.
The Liberal Democrats are dragging them there, Darren. We're dragging them there.
You heard it here first. Do you think we'll have Brexit again?
Oh, please, God, no. Not another one.
We've already left.
Indeed.
Yeah.
OK. We have run out of time. I'm glad to say, I think much to the relief of the viewers saying we don't want to talk about Brexit again. Max and Mercy, thank you as always. And Merry Christmas to you both, because I almost certainly won't see you this side of Christmas. I hope it's a good one. That is it from me for tonight. We're back again at 7. Up next, it's the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. Bye-bye.